prosecutor inside Jack Smith's own office was directly accused of quietly dangling a federal judgeship in front of a defense attorney if he could just get his client to flip on Donald Trump. And Jack Smith sat right there under oath and answered, "I did not find that allegation credible. This is no longer an investigation. This is a political machine being exposed in real time, live before the entire country. Watch the most explosive moment right now."
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, we've heard a lot of information that's gone across this day as we spin it here. We've heard disregard for the First Amendment at times. We've heard talk about solely seeking charges against Donald Trump, obviously targeting. We've talked about the amount of time and reasonable time frame. But I want to ask you for a moment, about some troubling reports that a prosecutor from your office, Jay Bratt, implied to Stanley Woodward that the administration would look more favorably on a judgeship application if he managed to get his client, Walt Nauta, to cooperate against President Trump and to flip on him. And we know this because Stanley Woodward himself came forth with this information. And I guess my question for you, is this appropriate behavior for a special counsel's office to leverage attorneys' future career prospects?
You heard it unequivocally. A Republican congressman explicitly named names. Jay Bratt, a senior prosecutor embedded inside Jack Smith's own office, stands accused of covertly dangling career incentives before defense attorney Stanley Woodward. The objective? To pressure his client Walt Nauta into flipping against Donald Trump. This is not idle internet gossip. This is sworn, damning testimony delivered during an open congressional hearing. How exactly did special counsel Jack Smith respond? He claimed the coercion occurred before his appointment, stating he only discovered it 9 months later. He then ordered an internal review and referred the matter to the Office of Professional Responsibility. On the surface, it appears procedurally clean, but look closer at the critical detail most overlooked. Stanley Woodward is no obscure, random lawyer. He has represented high-profile clients and previously held established ties to the Department of Justice. Stepping forward publicly meant jeopardizing his own professional livelihood. Therefore, why did Jack Smith accept a quiet internal review rather than instantly demanding a rigorous, fully independent investigation? Why did this scandal remain buried until television cameras rolled and evasion became impossible? This exposes the fundamental rot infecting the entire investigation. An absolute absence of transparency, zero meaningful external oversight, and an undeniable pattern of shielding the corrupt machinery driving it. Jack Smith is not above the system. He is the ultimate product of a deeply politicized Biden-era Department of Justice.
Sir, I believe I can answer this question, even though it's regarding the Florida case, because we did filings on it, and I'm not referring to anything in the final report. And my answer to you, sir, is that when I was first notified about this issue, which was 9 months after it allegedly occurred, this is alleged to have occurred before I was even special counsel. What I did is I directed my deputies to look into it. We made sure the person involved self-referred it to OPR, and then we did a filing to the court. There was a motion by President Trump's attorneys. We responded and we laid out our position, and our position was that I did not believe that that allegation was credible. At best, it was a misunderstanding because the people in the room did not understand any threat to be made. Even Mr. Woodard, in his allegation, claimed it was only an inference. 9 months went by where we interacted with Mr. Woodard, in which we had no hearing of a complaint. When the complaint was raised for the first time, which was on the eve of that indictment being brought, it was raised in the guise of asking the court to delay the indictment while an investigation of it happened. So I take allegations of misconduct very seriously. I would not want any of my attorneys threatening anybody. Ultimately, when I looked at this, I did not credit it, and we responded with our position in court. But we also, it was clear that it was referred to the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is what good prosecutors do in that situation.
Well, again, to say that you didn't consider it to be credible, I guess we have the United States Associate Attorney General Stanley Woodward, who claims that this threat was made to him, and I don't see what he would stand to gain from not telling the truth there. And I understand that you tasked two of your attorneys with investigating those statements made by Bratt, but given the amount of publicity and the scrutiny that was surrounding this entire investigation, why in the world did you not initiate an independent investigation into these very alarming allegations?
Well, 2 points there. You stated that you don't. Why would he do this? When he made the allegation, when this allegation first came from President Trump's attorneys, and then days later from Mr. Woodard, he did ask for the indictment to be put off in result of this. So there was a thing he was asking for in result. And with respect to an independent investigation, that's exactly why you refer this to the Office of Professional Responsibility. They conduct an independent investigation outside of my office.
Well, let me just say, for 4 years, we watched the Biden administration politicize and weaponize the Department of Justice. From going after pro-life activists to spying on faithful Catholics, the Biden administration showed disregard for impartiality. And this blatant disregard was perhaps no clearer than in the targeting of President Trump. We've talked about it all throughout this day. They knew they couldn't beat him at the ballot box, so they pursued alternative options. And I'm grateful for this committee's efforts today to investigate this conduct to ensure accountability. And while elections are not akin to jury trials, I feel strongly that the results of the 2024 election sent a clear message about how the American people feel about these politicized charges. And I think they absolutely made a difference in those 24 elections. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
You just watched Jack Smith fiercely defend himself to the bitter end. He insisted the devastating allegation lacked credibility, dismissing it as mere inference and claiming a quiet referral to the Office of Professional Responsibility was a proper, sufficient response. On paper, this sounds measured. In reality, the Republican congressman obliterated that defense, exposing its fatal flaw. Why did it take nearly a full year for this scandal to surface? Why was there no proactive demand for a truly independent investigation when the claim struck at the very heart of the special counsel's legitimacy? This is no minor procedural slip. It is a glaring warning sign of a special counsel's office operating deep in the shadows, a place where damning accusations against its own ranks are systematically minimized, delayed, or quietly managed in-house. When the integrity of an unprecedented prosecution hangs in the balance, waiting 9 months to rely on a toothless internal referral is not accountability. It is pure self-protection. At the same time, Donald Trump and his allies are far from clean. Their decisions to retain classified documents, the chaotic handling of January 6th, and the relentless campaign challenging the 2020 election results created the exact opening this machinery craved. Those actions handed Jack Smith and a politicized Biden-era Justice Department a ready-made justification to launch and sustain an extraordinary legal offensive. One side recklessly pushed the boundaries of power, the other side aggressively weaponized the tools of government in response. Both treated the American justice system as a partisan battlefield rather than a neutral, sacred institution. The tragic result remains the same for ordinary citizens. Years of ruthless political warfare have shattered public trust. We are left watching two fiercely powerful camps clash, while the rules seemingly bend to favor whoever holds the strongest position at the moment. When a special counsel must sit under oath and justify why severe allegations against his own prosecutors were handled so slowly and internally, the question is no longer only about Trump's conduct. The deeper, terrifying question is whether the system itself can still claim to be impartial. That is the real, devastating cost of this long, bitter contest for power. Now, let us return to the opening of the hearing. Jasmine Crockett began by dramatically accusing Republicans of hiding Jack Smith because they were afraid he would expose the truth. It sounds highly theatrical, but what actually is the truth?
Can I get an extra 33 seconds?
You get your full 5 minutes.
Well, okay, fine. It's curious because you've sat here all day, and thank you so much for showing up because this was something that you wanted to do. The Republicans wanted to make sure that you were hid in a room with no cameras because I was there. They didn't really want you out public because they were afraid of what you would say, which is that you could have proven your case because you are a career prosecutor who knows how to prosecute criminals. So just to be clear, Today, it seems like the Republicans have not really fought very much about whether or not Trump was guilty or not. In fact, their fight seems to be over whether or not you were authorized to prove their guilt. Do you recall a number of Republican members asking about whether or not your appointment was okay, even though we know that you've testified about the more than 100-year precedent that allowed for your appointment?
I was asked questions about that today, and our position, as we filed in our appeal, is that there was strong support for my appointment, including Supreme Court precedent directly on point.
Representative Crockett deliberately framed the moment as a Republican retreat, accusing them of terrified evasion, desperate to suppress whatever devastating truths Jack Smith might finally unleash. It was masterclass political theater. Brand the opposition as cowards running from accountability, while elevating your witness to the status of a fearless truth-teller. But listen closely to what Jack Smith actually delivered. His response was sterile, overly cautious, and purely technical. He hid behind a century of precedent and cited dry Supreme Court case law. He uttered absolutely nothing, not a single syllable, about the substance of the charges, the damning evidence, or Donald Trump's alleged crimes. Why the extreme, paralyzing caution? Because the very foundation of his authority had already suffered a catastrophic blow. A federal judge in Florida had previously declared his appointment as special counsel entirely unlawful, a ruling that struck directly at the heart of his legitimacy. Even as appeals dragged on and higher courts weighed in, that dark legal cloud never dissipated. Trump's legal apparatus and Republican allies weaponized that structural vulnerability and relentlessly squeezed. Consequently, more than a year later, Jack Smith found himself squandering a high-stakes congressional hearing, aggressively defending his basic right to hold the job, rather than defending the insurmountable strength of his case. That is the fatal flaw. When a prosecutor's most urgent mandate shifts to justifying his own existence, the investigation is already terminally compromised in the public eye. Crockett attempted to stage a grand morality play about fear and truth. Instead, the exchange exposed something far more damaging: a crippled prosecutor battling for mere institutional survival, while the underlying case drowned in a swamp of process, power, and partisan politics.
Thank you so much. Additionally, everybody's been all gingerly here today, but I don't know why we're acting surprised that a man who had close to 90 allegations out of 4 different jurisdictions and ultimately ended up with 34 convictions after a jury was able to hear all the evidence would possibly be committing a criminal act on January 6th. In fact, considering the fact that we are now under the impression that he is violating people's due process rights, he is ignoring court orders, he's starting wars without congressional authority in contradiction to the Constitution. He's enriching himself to the tune of over $1.4 billion. He's shaking down electeds to draw maps that will help him stay in power because the Republicans don't understand that they swore an oath to the Constitution and that we are supposed to do checks and balances. He's also shaking down TV stations to get money. So why are we trying to pretend as if it is out of the realm for this particular man to commit the crime that he committed on January 6th? And frankly, the only reason he ran for president was to make sure that he would not be prosecuted, because I fully believe that you would have put him under the jail based on our long form conversation that we had. But according to your special counsel report on page 137, it states the department's view that the Constitution prohibits the continued indictment and prosecution of a president is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proof, or the merits of the prosecution. And that, quote, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. In other words, Donald Trump ran for president, like I said, so he wouldn't have to spend the rest of his life in prison. The chairman and other members of this committee have spent all day attacking you and trying to rewrite the history of January 6th. But Mr. Jim Jordan, the chairman, failed to mention how he was running around the Capitol terrified by the possibility that all those insurrectionists would harm him. In fact, on page 97 of the deposition transcript, you mentioned how Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, quote unquote, never saw Jim Jordan so scared. The chairman also failed to mention that he was in direct contact with the White House in the days leading up to and on January 6th, which is why his toll records were subpoenaed by your office. Let me be clear, because they're trying to act like this is Democrats on Republicans, and I guess you are a covert Democrat that knew that he was going to try to steal an election before he tried to steal that election, and so therefore you were somehow put into place. I mean, the conspiracy theories make your head spin, but nevertheless, were you going to subpoena the toll records of every single Republican simply because they were a Republican?
No, we subpoenaed the toll records in the course of this investigation because they were relevant to our investigation.
This was Crockett's most lethal assault of the entire hearing. She methodically outlined nearly 90 allegations across 4 separate jurisdictions, reminded everyone of 34 convictions already secured by a jury, and then delivered a line that landed like a predetermined verdict. Quoting page 137 of Jack Smith's own report, she forcefully stated that the office concluded its admissible evidence was sufficient to sustain a trial conviction, thwarted only by Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency. In other words, winning the election was his absolute sole salvation. Pause right there. Jack Smith authored that report. He and his team evaluated their own evidence, declared it unequivocally powerful enough to convict, and allowed that definitive conclusion to be read aloud under oath during a congressional hearing. A prosecutor's duty is to present facts and let juries decide. When that same prosecutor publicly broadcasts that a case was fundamentally won on the evidence and only derailed by politics, the line between an impartial investigation and partisan messaging vanishes. Now, consider the glaring contradiction making this claim impossible to swallow. While Smith's office proudly championed its ironclad evidence, it simultaneously faced a severe allegation. One of its own prosecutors dangled a federal judgeship to coerce a defense attorney into flipping a crucial witness. One side of the ledger boasts overwhelming proof. The other is accused of manufacturing cooperation via career bribes. These competing realities cannot comfortably coexist within a clean, impartial investigation. Donald Trump and his allies are certainly no innocent bystanders here. Their reckless retention of classified documents, the chaotic mishandling of the events of January 6th, and repeated intense legal brinkmanship birthed the exact conditions necessary to ignite this prosecutorial machinery. Both factions treated the American justice system as a tactical weapon rather than a sacred, neutral institution. One side recklessly supplied the openings, as the opposing side aggressively charged through them with unprecedented, extraordinary force. Ultimately, the ordinary American public is left quietly watching the devastating collateral damage.
Relevant. Oh, okay. All right, so that means something about facts. So let's talk about facts. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, yes or no?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, 60 federal and state courts have found that there was no evidence of election fraud. Trump's own attorney general and vice president knew that he lost the election, but he still tried to steal the election by pressuring state officials, designing fake elector plans, nearly having Mike Pence hanged, and ultimately demanding that his supporters, quote, fight like hell, correct?
Correct.
We all saw it happen we all saw what happened once they reached the U.S. Capitol. As your report outlines, President Trump knew that he would incite violence at the Capitol that day. In fact, some of Trump's senior advisors were pushing for violence. For example, page 81 of the report details how co-conspirators number 2, John Eastman, tried to convince Mike Pence to break the law, stating that, quote, violence was necessary. So it isn't just Trump who is responsible for the death of multiple law enforcement officers and the injuries of thousands of people. A lot of Republican members of Congress are also responsible. 147 Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election results, including multiple members currently serving on this committee, and I will yield.
Crockett then sprung the classic yes or no trap. Did Donald Trump lose to Joe Biden? Correct. Did 60 federal and state courts find zero evidence of election fraud? Yes. Did Trump still try to overturn those results by pressuring state officials, pushing fake electors, and telling supporters to fight like hell? Correct. On the surface, it sounded airtight, almost surgical. Yet this is precisely how a congressional hearing transforms into pure political theater. Jack Smith merely repeated the word correct. Each clipped answer reinforced the image of the special counsel personally validating every element of his own narrative. He expanded nothing, qualified nothing, and added zero context, simply nodding along to the case his office constructed. When a special counsel sits in that chair and rubber stamps the indictment he authored, The boundary between an independent investigation and a partisan campaign dissolves in real time. Meanwhile, Trump and his allies expended most of their energy attacking Smith's procedures, his legality, and his prosecutor's conduct. They obsessed over process while largely dodging a full reckoning with the underlying decisions, retaining classified documents, the chaos of January 6th, and the relentless effort challenging the 2020 results that spawned this investigation in the first place. Both sides, in different ways, evaded the harder accountability. One faction used the hearing to lock in a prepackaged story. The other used it to assassinate the storyteller. What entirely vanished in the crossfire was any serious examination of how the justice system morphed into a battlefield, leaving ordinary citizens to watch the debris pile up. Reflecting on the entire hearing, a deeply distorted picture emerges. Jack Smith appeared cast as a defender of justice, yet spent most of his time cornered on defense, justifying his appointment, deflecting misconduct allegations inside his office, and defending a self-authored report declaring his own evidence sufficient to convict. That is not the posture of a neutral professional prosecutor. It is the defensive crouch of someone guarding an investigation thoroughly steeped in political controversy. Trump and his allies share a deep responsibility, too. They forged too many openings, from handling classified documents to the events of January 6th, that opposing machinery ruthlessly exploited. Instead of confronting those core decisions head-on, they fixated almost exclusively on attacking process and procedure. The ultimate casualty has been years of national bitterness and shattered public trust. This hearing was no victory for justice. It was living proof that the American legal system is actively weaponized as a political instrument by both sides. When a special counsel must sit under oath and explain why his own prosecutor allegedly dangled career incentives to flip a witness, the central question transcends Trump's guilt. The deeper, haunting question is whether the public can still believe the system itself remains fair. Decide for yourself. Thank you for watching. If you want straight analysis of these hearings without the usual spin, subscribe and turn on notifications. We will keep tracking every move from both sides.